What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, November 19th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Another 6-game NBA slate tonight, NBA Cup. So some of these teams might care a little bit more than usual. Some may not. It kind of depends on the coach, the team, all of that. But should be some pretty interesting games. We are also still waiting on a lot of injury news. So some of these teams, I am still just kind of using baseline minute projections. I haven't made my own adjustments. The teams that we're not waiting on the Q-tag guys, I have done my minutes. So I'll try and point out potential discrepancies that might end up coming up between now and lock in minute projections. But for the most part, if guys are in, then I'll probably end up pretty close to the baseline stuff I have in now. And if they're out, obviously it changes everything anyway. But a lot of teams that we are still waiting on stuff. So I'll make sure to hit on that as we go through. This will be my first look also at the exposures that I'm getting to. I just finished running everything right before this show, so haven't really taken too close of a look. So will be pretty interesting for me too. Maybe a couple things that surprise me, but going to get into it, starting with the Cavs taking on the Celtics. This is a game that does have injury news. I have baseline projections in for this one. For the Cavs, Karis LeVert, Sam Merrill, and Okoro are all questionable. For the Celtics, Peyton Pritchard is questionable. So on the Cavs side, you have Okoro, who missed the last game, I believe. LeVert played that one. Sam Merrill's missed a couple of games as well. So Merrill, obviously a depth piece off the bench, but Okoro and or LeVert missing this game would affect the rotation. And also, if Merrill's out, it's just one less body. Potentially you start getting down to like Craig Porter Jr. being in this rotation. Sam Merrill would potentially be kind of interesting at 3,200 if, for example, LeVert and Okoro are out. So there are implications, even though these are all bench guys except for Okoro, and he's not a super useful DFS piece. There are implications here. Max Strus already out, Dean Wade already out. You could actually have a pretty shorthanded Cleveland bench, which could mean more playing time for the guys that you typically play, like Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. But it also could make somebody like a 3K Craig Porter or a $3,200 Sam Merrill potentially interesting in this one as a value piece off the bench. With all of those guys projected in, though, I'm not getting to anything from Cleveland. The field's not getting to anything from Cleveland for the most part. And I think that's fine. If you want to get to some Darius Garland at 7,700 or some Donovan Mitchell at 9K, Evan Mobley at 7,900, any of that stuff is fine. Jared Allen at 7,300. Like, these guys obviously still have high ceilings in any individual game. They are very good players. You could make the case, too, that, this is clearly the most appealing game on the slate from an NBA standpoint. With the Cavs taking on Boston, maybe you get a couple extra minutes from these main guys because it is likely to be a competitive game for two teams that are involved in a lot of blowouts. So, if you look at the season-long playing time averages, maybe you just get a couple extra minutes here. For the season, Donovan Mitchell averaging 31 minutes per game because the Cavs are in so many blowouts. He could play 36, 37 here. Same goes for, all these guys on Cleveland and for the Boston side. But still not getting much of them, at least right now. This is a team where maybe I end up projecting them a little bit higher, but, you can see here in the minutes column, 35 minutes already in for Mitchell. It's hard to go higher than that based on what we've seen this year. 33.5 for Garland. Same thing there. Same thing on Mobley. So I do think these minute projections are already pretty good as far as factoring in this game likely being more competitive than most Cleveland games, and they're still not really showing up for me. On the Boston side, again, Peyton Pritchard questionable. That does have implications on the bench. He is 5K, so if he's in, probably playing mid to upper 20s in minutes. Occasionally you do get that game where he plays a ton, but we do also have Al Horford back. Still no Porzingis. So Pritchard, being questionable doesn't have a huge impact on too much. If he's out, you would probably just kind of see like more playing time for Sam Hauser, who's 3,900. Maybe Jordan Walsh gets a little bit more run in general, but probably not huge implications there. Whereas, on that Cleveland side, you do potentially end up with a pretty shorthanded team if all those guys ended up being out. Getting to more Boston than I was Cleveland, which obviously isn't saying much since I had no Cleveland, but the field is getting here more as well. Pretty reasonable pricing. Drew Holiday coming in at 5,200. He's showing up 20% of the time for me, 16% for the field. This is somebody that I do like because of this game likely being more competitive also. Drew Holiday, a veteran player, has some injury history, somebody that just kind of for a lot of this season hasn't been playing a ton of minutes, but you have seen the playing time ramped up recently. 32.8 minutes per game over his last 5 compared to 30.9 minutes per game for the season. 32 minutes in the last game he played, which was November 13th. So just this game likely being competitive does make it obviously more likely that somebody like Drew Holiday plays more minutes. I like getting to him at that price tag. Derek White, 12% projected ownership, 16% for me. He's been playing pretty healthy minutes all season long, averaging 34 minutes per game for the season, 36 minutes per game over the last 5, 35 over the last 10. So he looks pretty good at 6,900. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, pretty self-explanatory. If you can get to them, the ceilings are really high. These are two guys that, obviously cut into each other's production a bit because they kind of can bounce back and forth as far as who the higher usage guy is in any given game. But the ceiling is really high for both guys. And in a game like this, there is some positive correlation too from a playing time standpoint. If this game is competitive, does go down to the wire, both of these guys are likely to play above their season average in minutes. So I do think it's important. These are two guys that people bring up a lot as far as you can't play them together. They're still tough to play together because of their salaries, but it's, I think, something that kind of gets lost when people talk about correlation in NBA. People always tend to focus on, if you have your primary scorer, maybe you don't want to play him with the secondary scorer because it's hard for both of them to go off. But in a case of somebody like Tatum and Brown, while that is true, the minutes also are correlated, where if the game's competitive, you're just getting more minutes from all of these guys. So that is something to keep in mind as well. 37-minute projection on Tatum, 36.5 on Jaylen Brown. So again, projected to play a bit more than their season average. I'm a little below the field on them, but still getting there a little bit. I think if you wanted to get more than I do, than I have, there's nothing wrong with that either. Al Horford, the fifth guy here, did play 32 minutes last game. He had missed the game on the 13th on the second half of a back-to-back, but averaging 27 minutes per game for the season, averaging 30 minutes per game over his last 5. So this is a spot where I do think once I go through and do my minutes for Boston, I might end up projecting Horford a little bit higher. 28.5 was the baseline number here, but like I said, 30 minutes per game over his last 5 in a game that is pretty likely to be competitive. Chat telling me now that Pritchard is in, so appreciate that. Obviously, I had him projected in, so that doesn't change anything here, but good to know that he is in. So Horford here, not really showing up for the field, 4% projected ownership, only showed up in 1 out of 50 lineups for me. I don't think he ends up being a priority for me, but I do think I probably end up coming in a little bit higher just because I'm going to probably end up projecting him for an extra minute or so than I had when I ran this stuff before the show. But one way or the other, secondary play, $4,800 price tag is reasonable. He does only have center eligibility, though. And as always, center is a high opportunity cost position, though maybe a little bit less so on this slate than other slates when you think about who's playing. You don't have Claxton going for Brooklyn. You don't have a center period for Charlotte. Jared Allen's relatively expensive. You don't have Zach Edey for Memphis. You don't really have actual centers there. Jokic isn't playing. The Pels sort of have a center, sort of don't. The Mavs sort of have a center, sort of don't. I mean, they have two, obviously, but it's not like Lively or Gafford are super important pieces typically. Oklahoma City doesn't. Well, they have Jalen Williams, who now does have center eligibility, I guess. Wemby is out, but the Spurs still have, centers in Collins. So there are still good centers to get to, but opportunity cost maybe a little bit lower on this slate than usual. You don't have a lot of the super high upside guys or even mid-range guys that you do normally have. Now, moving on to Charlotte, Trey Mann is questionable for this one. He missed their last game. I haven't done my minutes projections for them, just kind of waiting on that. But this does look like a team that is going to be pretty useful today, at least as far as secondary options go. I'm getting to Brandon Miller, 2x the field right now. He's projected for 13.5% ownership at 6,600. He has shooting guard and small forward eligibility, which is really nice. It just makes it easier to fit him into a lot of different builds. He's playing big minutes, have him projected for about 34. He's averaging 1.01 DraftKings points per minute this season. This game's got a very, very close spread, which is nice on a slate that has several games out of 6 that have double-digit spreads. This one is pretty close. Miller averaging 35.5 minutes per game over his last 3, 36 over his last 5. So you're getting really big minutes from him. He's producing. He's easy to fit into lineups. I like getting to Brandon Miller here. LaMelo at 9,800, I'm right around the field, which is a nice change of pace because I've seemingly been jamming him into lineups every slate recently. So getting back closer to the field here, but really, really high ceiling. We've seen a ton of 3-point attempts from him so far this season. So far, he has a 38% usage rate. He's averaged 1.44 DraftKings points per minute. And the really interesting thing is that not only does he have a 38% usage rate, he has still maintained the 37% assist percentage so far this season as well. Typically, your usage rate and your assist percentage are negatively correlated, where if you see a player's usage rate really skyrocket, a lot of the time his assist percentage decreases. LaMelo is still contributing in both categories. Like I said, getting up a ton of 3-point attempts as well. Very, very high ceiling, but you are also paying for it at 9,800. And there is typically plenty of opportunity cost at the guard positions as well. So he still looks pretty good, but I have a little bit less today than I have in general. Miles Bridges getting 10% ownership. I have 2% right now. The playing time on him is interesting. He has, for the season, averaged 30 minutes per game, but only played 27 in each of his last two after missing several games. So, like I said, I haven't gone through and done minutes yet. Cam in chat said, do you think Miles Bridges plays 34 to 35 because it's NBA Cup game? I don't think that's the most likely case because of just the playing time we've seen from him, coming back from injury, playing 27 minutes in each of the last two. He did lose a couple minutes potentially to garbage time in that last game where maybe they were going to let him play like 29. He also had just weird first half rotations. He wasn't in foul trouble, but he played 4 minutes and 50 seconds to open the game. He played 5 minutes and 16 seconds to open the second quarter. He never came back. Whereas in the second half, he played more normal rotations. I do think, to your point, there's a pretty decent chance that he plays more minutes today than he has been. You can see here 29.5 was the projection that I used going in. I could see projecting like 31, 32. Like this is somebody that in the past has played, big minutes. We know he's capable of it. But the other thing here is this isn't even like blindly saying, oh, it's an NBA Cup game, I'm going to give him more minutes. Charlotte was actually a team, one of the only teams so far that had noticeably done something different or weird in a previous NBA Cup game. In the first game, which was against Orlando back on November 12th, that's a game where Orlando was absolutely destroying them, up by like 30 points in the fourth quarter. And LaMelo Ball subbed back in. Brandon Miller subbed back in. Ball came back with 5 minutes to go in the game. Miller came back with 4 minutes to go in the game. Bridges didn't play in that game. So I can't look at it and say, oh, yeah, Bridges, played 35 minutes or anything. But Charlotte clearly cared about the point differential there, bringing their main pieces back in a 30-point blowout. Orlando didn't bring most of their guys back. So there is, that is kind of one other point that you could make if you want to project the main Charlotte pieces a little bit more aggressively with it being an NBA Cup game. So right now, I'm not really getting too much Bridges at 6,300. I do think I probably end up a little bit more aggressive on his playing time projection here. Not going to go too crazy, though. Again, I think around 30 minutes is reasonable. You could argue for 31, maybe 32. But 1.05 DraftKings points per minute for the season. He has been productive. The only real question here is just, exactly how many minutes does he play? Because he's still only averaging 30 overall for the season, and his playing time has been down since coming back from injury. And then Grant Williams, I'm not getting to him at 4,800, at least right now. But he is getting 10% ownership. He is perfectly fine as a power forward play. I wouldn't really want to play him at center, I don't think. But he has been starting. He has produced 0.8 DraftKings points per minute overall this season. He's just a perfectly fine point per dollar value play if you want to go that route, which right now I'm not. But, again, he's fine if you're getting there. On the Brooklyn side, pretty good matchup for them and a lot of ownership coming into this team. Cam Thomas is probable. Dorian Finney-Smith is either probable or available. I don't remember. Yeah, probable. Zaire Williams is available. So we don't have any Q tags on Brooklyn, which is nice. We do have Nick Claxton out. Bogdanovich is still out. And then a bunch of guys that don't matter at all are out. But this is a team that has been pretty consistent with their rotations, with their playing time so far this season. You have seen the guys like Dennis Schroeder maybe lose a minute or two recently as they've gotten a bit more healthy as far as the wings and the backcourt goes, but still expecting around 33 minutes or so for Dennis Schroeder at only $6,100. Good price tag there. Fields getting to 27% ownership. I'm getting to about 28% ownership. Perfectly fine with that. 1 fantasy point per minute for him so far this season. That looks pretty good. Cam Johnson should give you around 32 minutes at 5,600. Fields getting to 26%. I have 16. Perfectly fine play. 0.9 DraftKings points per minute for the season. Cam Thomas is a spot that I'm getting a lot of that the field isn't, that I think is interesting, but that I am more than okay with. 20% projected ownership. So the field is getting there at 6,900. I'm just getting to more. I have 34% right now. He's somebody that I'm always willing to play in tournaments, although usually, you prefer him when he is low owned because he is a pretty scoring dependent player. There's a lot of volatility. He doesn't provide a whole lot as far as peripherals. So if his shot's not falling, you're probably in trouble. But he does have a 16% assist percentage this year. So it's not like he's an absolute zero there. He is typically going to be on the floor when Dennis Schroeder is not, which is going to put the ball in his hands more, allow him to get some assist opportunities then, in addition to some increased usage. But he far and away has the highest usage rate on this team this year at 30.5%. 1.03 DraftKings points per minute. But again, that's a per minute average, and he's not a very efficient scorer. But when Cam Thomas is hot, he piles up points. He also has shooting guard and small forward eligibility. So just like with Brandon Miller, who I'm getting a lot of, it's just really easy to fit Cam Thomas into a lot of different builds. So I do like going there. Dorian Finney-Smith, I'm a little bit higher than the field as well. I went 30 minutes on him. $4,100 price tag. Not a great fantasy producer on a per minute basis, but just expecting 30 minutes from him, 0.8 DraftKings points per minute. This is probably part of the reason that I wasn't getting to Grant Williams. It's just that I was getting even more Dorian Finney-Smith than the field because he is so cheap. He's $700 less than Grant Williams, for example. So happy to get there. And then Zaire Williams, I get it. The field's getting to 20%. He's coming off the bench, but playing, pretty big minutes. I projected 25 minutes, but any given game, it could be more. We got 28 minutes from him 2 games ago. We got 28 minutes from him 4 games ago. He's averaged 25 minutes per game over his last 5, 26 over his last 3. If you wanted to go an extra minute here, I wouldn't argue with that. But I think the reason that I'm not getting as much of him as the field isn't that I don't think he's a good point per dollar projection. You can see here I have him at 21 DraftKings points, 3,900. That looks pretty good. I think it's just kind of a lack of volatility. Not to say he can't have a big game. Overall this season, he has been solid, 0.9 DraftKings points per minute, 20% usage rate, rebounding at a pretty high clip, actually at 13%. But, he is on a team that has Cam Thomas chucking, has Dennis Schroeder. He actually has a higher usage rate so far this year than Cameron Johnson, which I don't necessarily think continues. So he's somebody that I'm just not super concerned burns me if I don't have him with Schroeder and Thomas and Cam Johnson all in. It certainly could happen, but, he's just typically I'm more likely to try and get away or to just naturally get away from popular players that I'm not super worried about putting up like 35 or 40 fantasy points. So, those guys are really, really hard to make up for. Guys that just, give you a 6x score at a cheap price tag are easier typically to make up for. So I will be interested to see, what other pieces I'm getting to in this price range. But even on this team, you can see it here where 20% ownership coming into Zaire Williams at 3,900, 25% coming into Dorian Finney-Smith. I just played more Finney-Smith also. So Finney-Smith probably one of the guys that I'm just prioritizing over Williams at that price point. I assume that there will be others as we go through the show as well. Now getting to Denver, no Nikola Jokic again tonight. I assume we're going to get the same starting lineup that we did last time. Jamal Murray, Christian Brown, Michael Porter Jr., Peyton Watson, and Dario Saric. Saric is really interesting here. He's going to be popular, 31% projected ownership, 4,700 center only. The center only eligibility sucks, obviously, because of opportunity cost, but we got 34 minutes from Saric in his first start. We got 32 last game, and that seemed like it wasn't going to happen at first, and I was tilting him pretty quickly because I had jammed him in last slate. He played like 5 minutes to start the game, didn't get in foul trouble or anything, just went to the bench, and it was like, oh, I feel like an idiot for giving him 30 minutes. I should have been less aggressive. He ended up coming back, playing the entire second quarter, played a similar rotation to open the third quarter, and then played pretty much the entire fourth quarter up until garbage time. So still ended up getting to 32 minutes. But one thing I want to point out here too that makes me bullish on his playing time. This is another game against Memphis. The last game was against Memphis, and then they're playing Memphis again tonight. I don't know for sure if it was by design, but it certainly looked like it was, that the Nuggets did not want Saric on the floor with Zach Edey. Saric subbed out after 4 minutes in the first quarter when Edey came in. DeAndre Jordan came in. DeAndre Jordan played all of the Edey minutes. Edey went back to the bench. Saric came back in. Edey subbed in from minute 19 in the second quarter, and Saric stayed in. Those were the only minutes where he was on the floor with Zach Edey. You saw the same thing in the second half. 5.5 minutes to start the third quarter for Saric. Then Zach Edey subs in. Saric goes to the bench. DeAndre Jordan comes in. Zach Edey leaves. DeAndre Jordan leaves not too long after. And then Saric comes in, plays the rest of the game. Edey was hurt, never came back. So you do lose the risk of Michael Malone not wanting him out there with Edey and Edey playing a bunch of minutes tonight and that screwing you. Edey's not playing. You're very likely to get like more Jay Huff in place of Edey, who is like a stretch five, not somebody that I think they're putting DeAndre Jordan out there to match up with. So that makes me feel good about Saric. And then also a thing to feel good about, I was surprised when Saric got the start 2 games ago in Jokic's absence, but it actually makes a lot of sense from a skill set standpoint if you think about it. This team doesn't have a lot of playmaking outside of Jokic. You know, you have Jamal Murray, but then Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Michael Porter Jr., those guys aren't doing a lot of it. Dario Saric is actually a capable passer for a big, capable playmaker. So it does make sense to kind of, not that he's anywhere close to Nikola Jokic in terms of skill, but he is the closest thing that they have to kind of filling that role. It's not DeAndre Jordan. It's not Zeke Naji. So I do think that, you know, barring foul trouble or injury, not having Edey here and then having the closest thing to a skill set overlap with Jokic that they have, it makes me actually feel pretty comfortable with Saric's minutes, in addition to the fact that he's played 34 and 32 in his 2 starts. So I projected 32 again here, gets him in 60% of my lineups, even at 31% projected ownership. He looks really, really good. Jamal Murray showing up 62% of the time for me right now. Fields at 26%. He hasn't been great. He was certainly disappointing last time out, but the playing time has been massive in these couple of games without Jokic. And it just goes back to Denver is a really, really bad team when Nikola Jokic is not on the floor. And they don't have the luxury of then playing a bunch of minutes without Jamal Murray on the floor either. He played 37 in the last one, lost a minute and a half to garbage time. He played 43 in the previous game without Jokic. I projected 38 here. That's what he's averaged over his last 5. I could drop it to 37. I might, just because I see how much I have. And I don't want to necessarily, I don't mind taking a big stand on Murray here, but I don't want it to just be because I gave him an extra minute when I could easily go 37. But either way, 37, 38 minutes, it's going to make Murray show up a lot. He's clearly going to have the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to be asked to do a lot without Jokic on the floor. So far this season, 112 minutes without Jokic on the floor, only 0.93 DraftKings points per minute for Murray, only a 20.8% usage rate, does have a 29% assist percentage, but he has shot 25% from 3, 43% true shooting over those minutes. So you expect the production to come up, and then most likely when or if his shot is falling, he probably is going to take more of them as well. If you go back to last season, 1.11 DraftKings points per minute without Jokic on the floor, 27.5% usage rate, 36% assist percentage over those minutes. Jamal Murray still looks good to me here, even though he hasn't played all that well lately. You could also, of course, make the argument that Murray does have a lengthy injury history. Maybe he's just not as good as he used to be, but one way or the other, I think I'm going to still end up getting to a good amount here. Even if I do cut him back to 37 minutes, he's still going to show up. Julian Strouder, 3,600, getting 16% ownership, probably playing around 24 minutes here off the bench. He's another guy that I'm getting some of, but I think the field may be a little bit too aggressive because he's a good point per dollar projection, but doesn't necessarily give you a ton of upside, barring somebody getting hurt. 0.83 DraftKings points per minute on the season for Strouder. Again, kind of in that bucket with Zaire Williams, where I think he's a perfectly fine play, but I can probably find some other pivots that have a similar range of outcomes. He is in 10% of my lineups, though. And then Michael Porter Jr. showing up 6% of the time for me, 5% for the field. Should play big minutes here. Only played like 27 last game. I think that is probably an anomaly. He wasn't in foul trouble, but he did only play 3 minutes to open the second quarter and then got benched. That was Memphis was on a very quick, like 10-0 run to open the quarter. So you had Christian Brown and Michael Porter Jr. immediately get benched. Assuming that doesn't happen, you're probably looking at 36, 37 minutes from Porter as well. So I do think he's a reasonable contrarian play, but at 7,200, he is pretty expensive. The field's getting to Westbrook at 5,500. They're getting to Brown a little bit at 5,900. I don't have either one right now. I went 23 minutes on Westbrook. I went 35 on Brown. I think they're okay. It's just, 5,500 for Westbrook at guard. I just assume I can find other guards that look better. He has been productive overall this year, 1.09 DraftKings points per minute without Jokic on the floor. But he is also getting some minutes overlapping with Jamal Murray. So far this season, 1.03 DraftKings points per minute in the minutes that Murray's been on the floor. 23% usage rate, 32.5% assist percentage. Murray hasn't slowed Westbrook down so far this year, but over a larger sample, I wouldn't be surprised if he starts to, just given that, Westbrook isn't exactly a good NBA player anymore. But also, we just haven't seen a huge uptick in playing time with Jokic out for Westbrook. There was the potential for him to play more, since we do know that they'll play him alongside Murray, but it's still been, 22, 23 minutes for him. So at 5,500 and getting some ownership, I'm not really getting him right now. I'd be more interested if he was just like 5% owned, and you could just say, okay, what happens if Westbrook plays well and plays his way into 26, 27 minutes? His fantasy production certainly correlated to some extent with his playing time here, since there are minutes potentially available. But I'm not getting to him. I'm not getting to Peyton Watson. Neither is the field. His playing time has surprisingly been down recently. He had some games where he played huge minutes in Aaron Gordon's absence, but lately sub 30. I went 30 minutes here, but, only played 28 last game. He did play a lot in the first half. So there is a path to him playing 34 minutes or so if he's playing well, but I don't really think that you can project it at this point. On the Memphis side, Marcus Smart is questionable. Zach Edey is out, as I already mentioned. So we still are going to have a very messy Memphis rotation, because that's what they've been doing all season long. We did get Desmond Bane back in the starting lineup. That was a good development last game. He had played about 27 minutes 2 games ago. He played 28.5 minutes as a starter last game. When I ran my stuff, I had him in for 30 minutes. That's probably about where I will leave him here. He's getting 11% ownership. I have 12%. He's a very high upside play. He is already $7,300, but with no Ja Morant, this is somebody that can take on a big playmaking role, a big scoring role. This is a very, very good player, and the upside for him is absolutely there. So I like getting to him. Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, Vince Williams, all getting like 4 to 9% ownership. I wouldn't mind getting to some Jackson, just because there is usage for him without Ja Morant, and he is really like the one guy on this team that's been playing consistently north of 30 minutes. Typically giving you 30 to 31, but that salary has gotten really expensive as well at 7,900. So I'm not getting to him right now. I think that probably is in part a function of getting to Cam Thomas at forward positions, getting to Brandon Miller a lot at a cheaper price tag, getting to Finney Smith for value at a forward position. It's probably just cutting out Jaren Jackson a bit. Brandon Clark here, 3,800, probably plays a little bit more with no Zach Edey. Played 22 minutes last game. I had 20 as the baseline minute projection here. I probably will end up going a little bit higher than that, just because of Edey being out, but it's also just really difficult to go too much higher with confidence, because I do assume that Jay Huff is going to be in the rotation. Huff is somebody that we've seen play ahead of Clark at times this year. And then you also can go with Jaren Jackson Jr. at center for more minutes. They have no shortage of wings with LaRavia, Conchar, if Smart's in, Smart, Kennard, you have Pippen, you have Vince Williams back. So there's no shortage of wings here that they can use to just give Jaren Jackson Jr. more minutes at the 5 as well. So I don't want to go too crazy with Brandon Clark's minutes. I might end up going a little bit higher than this 20 though. At 3,800, he projects as a pretty good value. The problem though is the opportunity cost. Center, just not a very forgiving position. If you play a bunch of Brandon Clark there and he goes for 24 DraftKings points at 3,800, he's probably actively hurting you because you just you're likely to be missing out on some of the higher scores on the slate at center. But again, you do have a little bit lower opportunity cost today than on some other slates. Vince Williams, 3,900, a pretty interesting price tag. He only played 14 minutes last game, which was less than I was hoping or expecting. Or granted, I didn't really play him, so I was, I guess, hoping for 14 minutes, but I thought he would play a little bit more. He played 24 minutes, though, 2 games ago. So I do think he's kind of interesting. Like 17 minutes was the projection that I had when I ran my stuff. I think that's very reasonable. If you wanted to go like 18 or 19, I think that would be fine, especially with Edey being out. Like Vince Williams is somebody that can benefit. If Marcus Smart is out, that would open up more minutes potentially for Williams too, although Smart was also out last game. So the main takeaway here is nobody knows what the hell Memphis is going to do with their minutes because the rotations are an absolute joke. Vince Williams can play anywhere from like 14 to 26 minutes today, probably. And he's 3,900 and not getting ownership. I don't have him right now, but he is kind of just interesting from a volatility standpoint where, again, if he played 24, 26 minutes, it's not crazy. And nobody's playing him. Jay Huff, 3,300 at center, not getting any ownership right now. I do think he's interesting. I'm getting a little bit solid fantasy producer when he's on the floor. The minutes are anybody's guess, but 1.3 DraftKings points per minute in 184 minutes played so far this season. Like I said, there have been games where he's actually gotten run ahead of Brandon Clark. He does bring a different skill set than Brandon Clark. He can step out, knock down threes, plays well defensively also. So maybe get some more run, Zach Edey being a big defensive presence being out. Maybe you get more Jay Huff in there for rim protection. So I do think Huff's interesting. Again, 14-minute projection when I ran my stuff got him in lineups a little bit, but I think you can make the case for going a little bit higher on him, a little bit higher on Clark, a little bit higher on Williams. Again, everything's just so volatile here that I don't mind taking some shots on a $3,300 Jay Huff. Obviously, the floor is extremely low. The opportunity cost at the position is high, all of that. But I do find him interesting. To compare him on a point per minute basis to Brandon Clark this season, Clark 0.83 DraftKings points per minute. So half a fantasy point per minute extra so far this season for Huff. Now, he has shot 43% from 3, 72% true shooting, probably comes down, and so does the fantasy production along with it. But, he's clearly been a very, very good fantasy producer so far. So I do find him interesting. Nothing else from Memphis really showing up right now. If Smart were to be out, I don't know. Maybe it opens up taking some shots at like some combination of Wells, Kennard, Pippen, but it's all pretty ugly. You got 25 and a half minutes from Pippen last game with Smart out. You got 26 from Wells. You did get 26 from Kennard, which is interesting because he's only 4,100. Yeah, I don't know. Bane and Jackson are the only 2 guys on this team I think you can be confident in their minutes. Other than that, I think you can make the very reasonable case for, I don't know, neither does the field. If they're low owned, I'll roll the dice in the top heavy GPPs for basically anybody. Also for basically anybody other than Bane or Jackson. If somebody tells you that they know for sure how many minutes they are playing, that person is lying to you and way overconfident because Taylor Jenkins probably doesn't know. He makes that shit up on the fly. So a lot of volatility here. Embrace it in low-owned spots at cheap salaries if you want to. Pels taking on the Mavericks. The Pels are one of the few teams on the slate that do not have any Q tags right now. They just have half of their team already out. No Alvarado, no Hawkins, no Jones, no McCollum, no DeJounte Murray, and no Zion Williamson. We do get Trey Murphy back, though. Trey Murphy played 30 minutes in his last game. I assume he's playing around 30 minutes here. This game does have a double-digit spread, so I knocked the minute off of his projection. But expecting, around 30 minutes from Trey Murphy. Got him into 10% of my lineups. Fields at 22%. 5,600 is a pretty good price tag for him. He's a solid fantasy producer. Going back to the start of last season, it's going to take me a second because I just clicked on the wrong team. But I want to say he's like a 0.9 to 1 fantasy point per minute guy. Going back to last season, I am double checking that though. I haven't looked at it so far this season. So that is just completely going from memory and probably making things up. 0.92 DraftKings points per minute in 2,015 minutes played since the start of last season. Obviously, you could see that number go up a bit when he's playing a lot of minutes alongside guys like Javonte Green, Brandon Boston, instead of CJ McCollum and Zion. Not quite the same high usage players there. So I do think Murphy's fine, but at that ownership, I'm just getting a little bit less. Nobody else here is getting much. Brandon Ingram's up to $9,300. He is playing big minutes. If this game does stay competitive, he probably plays 37 or 38. He also is probably a big reason why the game is competitive if it stays competitive. So there is that upside, but also 9,300 is a hell of a price tag. Jalen Noel, 4,500. Seemingly was in every good lineup that I had for a couple of slates when he was playing poorly. And then last game comes out, plays a ton of minutes, plays really well, and wasn't on the slate, or I didn't have him or something. But 4,500 projected for 24 minutes. If he plays well, maybe plays more. Getting 3% ownership. I don't have him, but again, kind of that volatility play. You should get 35, 36 minutes or so from Boston, but he's priced up to 6,800. Missy should play anywhere from 26 to 30, depending on how the game is going. I did knock a couple minutes off of him because of Murphy being back. I think it changes the rotations a little bit. When Murphy was out, you were getting Jeremiah Robinson Earl playing the vast majority of his minutes at the 4, and you were getting a center split between Misi and Trey Jamison, where Misi was playing like 28, 29, 30 minutes. And then Jemison was getting the backup minutes. Now you have a little bit more of a 3-center rotation where Robinson Earl will also play minutes at the 5 because he doesn't have to play them at the 4 because you have Trey Murphy back. So that did knock a couple minutes off of what I'm doing at center there. Jamal Cain should give you 20 minutes. Javonte Green should lose a couple minutes with Murphy back as well. So not a lot to like from this team. Obviously they are far from healthy, but they've been hurt for so long that you have seen prices adjust. On the Dallas side, Luka is questionable, but he did go through shoot around. So I projected him in. If he misses this game, obviously you need to be late swapping to more Dallas stuff. But with him projected in, there is not a lot to like on this team, but apparently there is one guy to love, at least for me. Derek Lively is now the starter at center. He is $4,400. He is playing good enough minutes for $4,400. I'm a little surprised he's only getting 17% ownership. If you are paying attention, you can see that I am apparently using center to pay down quite a bit tonight because I have 60% of Scherer and 50% almost of Lively. So it goes back to the point at center where you don't have as strong a mid-range tonight, which makes it a little bit easier to pay down, but you do still have opportunity costs because, in my opinion, Lively and Scherer are two of the best values on the slate. And so I am using them a lot at center. Derek Lively in the games that the last couple of games, that he has started, he played 26 minutes last game. He played 20 the game before that. That was kind of a weird game where the rotations were really weird. I don't think you could necessarily take a lot away from it. They beat the Spurs by 17 points in that game. Lively played about 20 or 11 to 12 minutes in the first half, ended up getting to 20 and a half minutes. I think if that game had been competitive, he would have played more in the second half. His rotations last game against Oklahoma City were more favorable, where he played 25 and a half, 26 minutes. So I went 26 minutes here, or 25 minutes rather. I think you could knock it down to 24. Again, kind of like I was saying with Jamal Murray, I might do that after the show now that I see how much I'm getting. Not that I mind getting 48%. I think he's a good play. But again, I don't want to just be jamming him because I somewhat arbitrarily chose 25 minutes instead of 24. But if I were to go to 24 and still be getting a lot of him, which I probably would, I'm more than happy with that. He's a solid enough fantasy producer. The matchup here, I think, is fine. He's not getting a ton of ownership, so I do like him. Luka is Luka. He's low owned. He's hurt. But if he plays, if you want to get to some of him at very low ownership on a 6-game slate, that is obviously perfectly fine. We just got Dorian Finney-Smith available to play. That was already expected. Klay Thompson, 5,100, shooting guard, small forward. He's cheap. He's probably playing about 29 minutes or so. If he gets hot from 3, you want him. If he doesn't, you don't. It's been the case with Klay Thompson for, a decade. So, yeah, he's fine, but not a priority. Daniel Gafford getting 9% projected ownership right now at 4,900. That one's a little surprising to me. I'm not getting to him. He's somebody that in general I've played a lot of this year, but he's more expensive than Scherer. He's more expensive than Lively. You just don't have much of an ownership gap here between Lively and Gafford. And I don't know if that's just, ownership projections that are going to change, or if the industry just is projecting these guys to be closer in playing time than I think they are. I think you're looking at, 18, 19, 20 minutes from Gafford, and then mid-20s from Lively in most games. I don't think you're looking at a lot, very often at like 20 minutes a piece or anything like that. It'll happen sometimes. It basically happened 2 games ago where Gafford played 19, Lively played 20. But again, that's a game that wasn't competitive down the stretch, and it probably didn't really cost Gafford minutes. It probably did cost Lively minutes. So I don't know. I don't think that these two are – you're going to have some games where Gafford plays more minutes or they play the same minutes. But I think more often than not, Lively is the guy here. We were even seeing early in the season when Gafford was starting some games where Lively was playing more than him off the bench. So I do think Lively is the guy more so than Gafford, and I am projecting him to play quite a few more minutes than Gafford. So I do just like Lively here, and I don't really get the Gafford ownership a ton, although he is a good point per minute guy, certainly can get it done in limited playing time like he did a couple of games ago. I think he smashed in that game where he played 19 minutes. We just got news that I can't see. Oh, had nothing to do with the NBA. So yeah, Lively the priority for me from Dallas. For Oklahoma City, still obviously no Chet Holmgren for a very long time. No Isaiah Joe tonight, so that does shake up the starting lineup. My assumption is that Kaysen Wallace moves into the starting lineup along with Aaron Wiggins, and then obviously SGA, Dort, and Holmgren, or Jalen Williams, rather. What Mark Daigneault actually does, I have no idea, but that's my best guess. And I am getting to a lot of this team. There is blowout risk in this game, but it is always a little bit less concerning for the team doing the blowing out. Now, again, if you get a situation like last night with the Knicks, it's just bad in general because, the Knicks didn't have to play a single second in the fourth quarter because they were up by 30 plus. But a lot of times I think people kind of shy away from these games with 11, 12, 13-point total or spreads when realistically, if the game just kind of stays between 15 and 20 points, you're going to lose a few minutes for these guys at the end, but you're not going to lose a ton. So you just kind of need to avoid that like 25 plus point for the entire game blowout, and you should be okay. And then the other thing here too is like if this game is actually competitive down to the wire, SGA is probably playing like 37, 38 minutes. Dort's potentially playing more than 33. Williams is potentially playing more than 33. So I really like getting to Oklahoma City here at pretty low ownership. Lou Dort, 23% projected ownership. I'm getting to 34% at 4,800. Shooting guard, small forward. So again, really, really flexible, easy to fit into lineups. He looks like a guy that I'm using probably to some extent as a pivot from, value like Zaire Williams, although Williams is a little bit cheaper. Aaron Wiggins, I projected for 26 minutes. The minutes can still obviously disappear, but not having Isaiah Joe does matter because it's just one less body that we know Mark Daigneault will use interchangeably along with Aaron Wiggins. You have, Dylan Jones was in the rotation last game ahead of Ousmane Dieng. I don't know that Dylan Jones is somebody that Daigneault will play ahead of Aaron Wiggins all that often. You do have Alex Caruso back, but they've been pretty cautious with Caruso's minutes in general this year. And then now you have him, coming back. So I gave him 22 minutes. I don't think he's playing 26, 27, anything like that. It was just difficult enough to project minutes for this team that I felt okay going to like 25, 26 minutes with Wiggins. Kenrich Williams is a really interesting one for me. I was curious to see what I'd be getting to. I don't have a crazy projection on him. You can see I have like a 17 fantasy point projection, but I did go 20 minutes. And the reason for that is he missed the beginning of the season, and we've seen him come back and play a few games now, and we've seen his minutes trend up. He came back 4 games ago, played 6 minutes, then he played 14, then he played 15. Last game he played 18. I went to 20 here for a couple of reasons. One is just, like I said, the minutes are trending up and you are missing bigs on this team. Like you do not have bigs. You have tons and tons and tons of wings. Not that Kenrich Williams is the biggest guy, but he is somebody that, can kind of just get those backup minutes behind Jalen Williams and then also play some minutes alongside him. But also I thought it was really interesting last game, not that you get consistent closing rotations from Daigneault, but the closing lineup in a competitive game last game was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, the 3 guys are going to be out there, AJ Mitchell, and Kenrich Williams. So there is closing potential here for Williams. There is the potential for him to just play additional minutes with the second unit than he's been playing. He's only 3,200. He's not getting any ownership. on a 6-game slate where anybody that offers any semblance of value is getting 15 to 20% ownership, I'm happy taking the stand. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. The payoffs, if it does work out and he's really low owned, are really, really nice. SGA on 2x the field at 10-6, clearly fine with that. No Wemby, or actually, yeah, Wemby officially out now. So no Wemby does, take away rim protection there, makes their defense worse as a whole. It looks like a really good spot for SGA for as long as he's on the floor. But also a nice thing about the Thunder compared to like the Knicks, who I got burned by badly last night. There are less guys, not that, somebody other than SGA or Jalen Williams can't have a really big game and just put the game out of reach. But if this does turn into that 30-point blowout that really costs somebody like SGA or Jalen Williams minutes, it's very, very likely that either SGA or Jalen Williams had a very big game. Whereas with the Knicks, Karl-Anthony Towns had a good game. Jalen Brunson had a good game. OG had a good game. And then suddenly, they're just beating the Wizards by 35 points. So you just have less scorers on this team to contend with. It's pretty much the SGA and Jalen Williams show for the most part. So that makes me like him as well. Cason Wallace on 2x the field, 3,800. He's another one. Like I don't love getting to him. I have like a 20-point projection on him, but I don't know why he's projected for half the ownership of like Zaire Williams right now. I think they're very, very similar plays. They are both most likely playing mid-20s in minutes. I have Cason Wallace projected a minute or two higher than Zaire just because I think the injury situation on OKC is more favorable to Wallace than it is to Williams in Brooklyn. So, yeah, not a super exciting player, but if the field's going to play Zaire Williams twice as often, I'll just play Cason Wallace the way that they're playing Zaire Williams, and I'll play Zaire Williams the way that they're playing Cason Wallace. They are like completely interchangeable pieces to me. And yeah, if the ownership were flipped, I'd probably be playing Zaire Williams 20% and Cason Wallace 10. They are kind of just the same thing, and I'm taking the lower ownership. Jalen Williams, center only at 8,500, makes him tough to prioritize. I am getting to 10%. I do think it's a good spot for him. He's obviously a really, really good NBA player, but center only does just make it difficult to get there. And then I have a small amount of Alex Caruso, which I could take or leave. There's not a whole lot to say there. On the San Antonio side, Wemby is out. Devin Vassell is questionable, which does matter. And this game does start 2.5 hours after the slate locks. So probably not going to have news there, I would assume. But Vassell has missed a lot of the season, but he's been back for the last few games. He's played 21, 25, 22 minutes off the bench. He missed their last game on the 16th. And I think was a midday downgrade today. I'm not positive, but I don't think he was on the injury report when the day started, which would make it more likely that he doesn't play. So you have a San Antonio team that is missing Wemby, maybe missing Vassell, and that does open some stuff up here. Zach Collins got the start in place of Wemby last game. He played 26 minutes, lost run to garbage time, or probably would have played more. So so this is a spot where I'm probably going to project an extra minute or two on Zach Collins compared to the baseline projection here. Obviously, this game does have blowout risk as well, and that's why he only played 26 last game. But if this game is somewhat competitive, Collins probably does play a bit more. At 5,500, I think he's a solid value. I'm not getting him because right now I'm getting so much Lively and so much Saric that it's just cutting into my Zach Collins. But I do think he's a good value. And if you're playing Lively or Saric less than I am, you should be playing Collins more than I am. Charles Bassey was the backup center behind Collins last game, which was an interesting development. We'd seen Mamu playing minutes relatively consistently this year, some games more than others, but you hadn't really been seeing Charles Bassey at all. He was the direct backup to Collins last game, though. He played every minute that Zach Collins was not on the floor. Now, could that change today? And Bassey's not in the rotation and Mamu's the backup, or, Bassey plays one stint and Mamu plays one stint. Sure. Like, these minutes are not set in stone, but with the information that we have, Charles Bassey is the backup center with Wemby out. And at 3,400, that makes him look like a good value, especially if he's only going to be projected for about 10% ownership. I'm getting to about 18% right now. This is somebody that, we know isn't a good enough NBA player to stick in anybody's rotation, but this is somebody that we know produces fantasy points when he is given, opportunities. Going back over the last 3 seasons across God knows how many teams, It feels like probably 5 or something. 1.16 DraftKings points per minute last year in 35 games played. 1.13, or sorry, 2 years ago in 35 games played. 1.13 last year. 1.06 so far this year in 7 total games. A lot of those you're getting like 2 minutes. But the point being, he's a good point per minute guy. And if he plays every minute that Collins doesn't play, he's going to look really good. Like you can see here in the minutes projections, and I think this is fine because, again, Mamu could just end up playing more minutes than he did last game. But 26 plus 16 minutes, that leaves 6 minutes at center. What they did last game was 26 for Collins and basically 22 for Bassey. If Bassey plays 22 minutes, and again, some of that was garbage time, but Bassey will play garbage time. If Bassey plays 22 minutes at 3,400, he's basically a lock to be a good play. If he plays 16 minutes, he still looks fine. So I do like Bassey here as a value. And again, this just drives home the point that I think center is a really good position for value tonight for the reasons that I've already mentioned. Champagny getting 8% ownership at 4,800. I'm getting 2%. He's fine as the last guy in. Nothing super exciting about him at all. Probably plays around 28 minutes. Same goes for Chris Paul at 6,200. So I do like Bassey here. He's probably the guy I get to the most from the Spurs. I think Collins looks fine. The reason I'm not getting him is just that I'm going to guys even cheaper. But again, if you're getting less Bassey, less Scherer, less whoever else I said, Lively, then you should just be getting to more Collins because he does look like a good value as well. Now, wrapping things up with the final game, Utah taking on the Lakers as double-digit underdogs in LA. That is a lot of Lauri Markkanen. He's 7K, which is a really good price tag. He is Lauri Markkanen, which is a really good basketball player. He is not getting a ton of ownership at 15%. He is a forward, which is not as deep a position as center or guard. So there is less opportunity cost, which is nice. 1.18 DraftKings points per minute since the start of last season. I went 34 minutes here. There is obviously, again, blowout risk, and it is a little bit scarier for the team that is the underdog because if Markkanen loses minutes to blowout, he probably wasn't having a monster game either, or he was playing fine and his teammates just all suck. And so, it is a little bit riskier, but I think the playing time for him lately has been really nice as well, at least in the last couple of games. 39 minutes in a competitive game 2 nights ago. On the 16th, he played 35 minutes. On the 14th, he only played 24. That was the game against Dallas where I don't remember what happened, if he got hurt or what, but he only played 24 in that one. That one was weird. But 35 last game, 39 or 35 2 games ago, 39 last game. I went 34 here. Again, could cut that to like 33, which I probably will after the show for the same reason as Jamal Murray and Derek Lively. I think Markkanen's a good play. I don't need to just arbitrarily be a minute high. But either way, I do like him at 15% ownership. High upside play. Like if the Jazz stay in this game, he's a pretty good candidate to be a reason why. And I think this price tag is just a little bit cheap. Jordan Clarkson at 5,200, getting a lot of ownership at 32%. I'm getting to 28%. I think that looks fine. He is or has been coming off the bench. I assume he comes off the bench again today, but he's been pretty consistently playing like 29, 30 minutes off the bench, 30 minutes, 4 games in a row, averaging 29 minutes per game over his last 5, 26 and a half over his last 10. I went to 28 minutes. I think you could go to like 27. The biggest concern on Clarkson would be sixth men get burned pretty badly if games are blowouts because they're not going to leave him in through garbage time and he's not playing the beginning of the third quarter. So you get a rotation where he really gets hurt in the second half. So that is scary for Clarkson, especially at high ownership. But the $5,200 price tag is just so appealing for somebody averaging 1.08 DraftKings points per minute so far this season. John Collins, power forward center, 6,900, should give you 30 to 32 minutes. 19% projected ownership. I'm into 12%. I think that looks fine. Colin Sexton showing up a little bit for me at 5,600. Nothing crazy there. Still no Walker Kessler today. We did have one other thing to mention, going back to the market in minutes. We actually did have a different rotation last game from Utah as well. There was no Johnny Juzang in the rotation. I projected him for like 5 or 6 minutes today. I didn't give him a straight DNP, but if Utah is going to cut him out of the rotation, that means a little bit more playing time for a combination of Markkanen, Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, Keontae George, like those guys all just getting a little bit of an uptick where Johnny Juzang was kind of just siphoning minutes off of everybody. So that will be something to pay attention to. Like I said, I projected him in today, but I did project him to play a little bit less than I would have if, he had played his normal role last game. So there is that. Finally, wrapping things up with the Lakers, Rui is questionable in this one. That does matter since you're talking about a lot of minutes that would be opened up to go to all of the interchangeable wings that the Lakers have. No Jackson Hayes again. No Christian Wood, Jared Vanderbilt. That's been the case for a while. Bronny is doubtful, which nobody cares. No Hood Schifino. So Rui is the only injury news that we are waiting on here. LeBron showing up a lot for me, showing up a lot for the field as well. He has been putting up really good assist numbers. He's been playing really big minutes. You have him, with D'Angelo Russell playing fewer minutes. You have him being asked to facilitate more. Russell, again, last game only played 21 minutes, and that was even without Rui. So LeBron's going to look very good here at 10K. Also, Ford eligible, so the opportunity cost not as high as some other positions. Ted said Markkanen rolled his ankle in the game he played 24. Thank you. I thought I remembered seeing a notification that he had been hurt, but I wasn't 100% sure. If he had finished that game, like if we assume he was just going to play the rest of the fourth quarter, he left like 7 minutes on the table. It would have gotten him to like 32 or 33, but he also had kind of like weird abbreviated first half rotations. So anyway, I'm just kind of bullish on Markkanen's minutes here if they are able to hang in this game. For the Lakers, LeBron looks really good. Reeves, 26% of my lineups at 7,100, Fields at 18%. He's playing big minutes as well. Can take on a little bit bigger role offensively without Russell on the floor as much too. Anthony Davis is a center that I am paying up for. 26% projected ownership. I'm getting to 22%. And then Rui, if he's in at 5,100, looks fine. If Rui's out, we did get Dalton Knecht getting the start. Last game, he's 4,500. He played a lot. He played 37 minutes. He's going to look like a good value if Rui gets ruled out. Obviously, we probably won't have that information for a while. So be ready to late swap for that because these wing pieces do look better. Max Christie played 30 minutes without Rui. Knecht played 37. Reeves got up to 41 minutes. Vincent was still down at about 21 minutes, 22 minutes. Russell did only play 21 minutes in that game. So keep in mind that there are iterations of this rotation where Russell plays 25, 26 minutes, and it cuts into Christie and Knecht somewhat. But you will get some value opening up here if Rui gets ruled out. Gabe Vincent also only 3,200. So if he projects for 22 minutes, suddenly he's playable too. So Rui is a really, really big piece here since he plays 30 plus minutes. And those minutes are just going to get redistributed to really cheap players if he's out. So keep an eye on that one. But LeBron, Reeves, Davis look like the priorities from the Lakers for me right now. To recap everything, Murray, Saric, Lively, Markkanen showing up most often for me overall. I am going to cut a minute off of Murray, Lively, and Markkanen because all three of those were guys that going into when I was doing my projections, I was kind of just waffling back and forth. So seeing that I'm just jamming them, I'm just going to go with what I thought was a very reasonable, slightly lower projection, but I will still get to them. I do like Saric a lot. Mentioned the reasons when I talked about that game that I actually am pretty confident, I guess, in his minutes, barring foul trouble. I think, it just logically makes sense for him to be on the floor. And the fact that Edey is not playing for the Grizzlies makes me like Saric more also. Cam Thomas, Lou Dort, Aaron Wiggins, Finney Smith, Dort, Wiggins, Finney Smith showing up as value. LeBron as a pay-up option. Clarkson and Schroeder, some popular mid-range guard options. So pretty interesting slate. A lot of news that we are still waiting on, so keep an eye out for all of that. I recommend following Underdog Fantasy on Twitter for NBA news. I recommend signing up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below if you want to improve your DFS game. I think it is the best place to do it as far as learning strategy, avoiding mistakes that other people have made, just getting questions answered by quality players. Utica, Nerdy Tanner, Brick75, myself, we all approach DFS differently. We've all had success with our different approaches. Between the four of us, there's somebody that has a similar skill set to you and thinks about the game and plays the game similarly to the way that you do. A lot of training videos up over there, Discord access with all of us, in addition to a lot of just really good players in general that are hanging out in there talking DFS. So highly recommend checking that out. And then other than that, hit the thumbs up button on your way out. Appreciate you checking out the show, and I will see you back here at the same time tomorrow.